Hello and welcome to the second episode of our series, The Land of Arya. If you remember, in our last episode, we talked about the geographical situation of Iran and some of its earlier civilization and people. Now, in this episode, we're going to actually talk about the entrance of the Iranians into the Iranian plateau and their early history. But before we do that, we need to first understand who are the Iranians? What do we mean by calling a certain group Indo-European? And what does it mean when the Iranians call themselves Aryans? Now, in order to truly understand that, we need to first follow the history of the concept and how the just idea of Indo-European came to be. And for that, we need to go to England, late 1700, and look at a man named Sir William Jones. Now, Sir William Jones was a linguist who knew English and Welsh and Gothic and Persian, and it's because of his background as a linguist that he's hired by the East India Company to come and translate Sanskrit, because the East India Company at that time is trying to understand Hindu legal codes as it's expanded its rule in India. And it's in his dealings with the Sanskrit language that Sir William Jones comes to the realization that, wait a second, how comes all this language all the way on the other end of the world has similar verbs, words, pattern as English, Persian, Italian? What is going on there? And then he comes up with an idea. Perhaps it's because all these languages derive from the same source, from a Proto-Indo-European. 3 centuries of history and understanding and research on this topic has just proven his theory correct. All these people do share, not only linguistically, but also culturally and genetically and in terms of anthropology, similar patterns that can be sourced and derived from the same start. Now, a good way to understanding the Europeans is to think of the Proto-Indo-European, their source language, as a trunk of a tree, and all these little different languages of different groups as different branches of this massive tree. However, again, let me reiterate that it's not just linguistic similarities, but also cultural, philosophical, and mythological understandings of the world. A very simple example would be this concept and understanding that the god is in the sky. Well, that's because the Proto-Indo-European languages saw the chief of their gods as a sky god, compared, let's say, with the Semitics, who saw it so often as a moon god, or let's say with the Elamites. That's one of the reasons I was talking and mentioning the mythological aspects of the pre-Iranian people of the Iranian plateau, to show that they're distinct, is that in the Elamites, their chief gods, they are a trinity of women, which is completely different from the perspective of just the Indo-European worldview. I mean, we just talked about, we're talking about divine. The very word divine means God in every language, from the Indus Valley all the way to England, with the modern exception of Iran, which we'll get to. It's a very fascinating story. But again, it's all because of the same word. So this is who the Indo-Europeans are, but where do they come from? That's interesting. See, in terms of trying to understand linguistically where they come from, what they do is they look at the words that they had for and try to compare it with different places to say, well, did they have to deal with these things in those places or not? So in the Europeans, they had a word for copper. So therefore, Europe is out, because Europe at that time did not have copper. Europe goes from Neolithic, so Stone Age, directly into the Bronze Age. It skips the Copper Age. Copper Age is something that happens towards the Middle East and a bit around it, but not in Europe. So Europe is out as their homeland. They had horses. So we're not talking about Middle East, because they don't have horses in that sense of the things that we're thinking about. They had words for beekeeping. So anything past the Ural Mountains are out too, because they didn't have honeybees there. That leaves the area north of the Caucasus Mountain and north of the Black Sea as the possible homeland of the Indo-Europeans. That is why we call the white Indo-European people Caucasians, again, with this idea that they come from the Caucasus Mountain. However, this is not just based on languages. Excavations in the area have led to findings of many, many tombs of the Indo-Europeans and their culture and their people. See, Indo-Europeans, one of the things that is very essential about understanding them is that they do domesticate horses and breed them to a level that you can ride them like a human can ride on a horse. And it's because of that, this was one of the main powers that the Indo-Europeans have when they migrate and go on campaigns of conquest, that they keep on usually being the dominant force, is because they have horses. And they can ride these horses in this manner, while others are fighting still, basically mainly on foot. So understanding how holy and how essential horse is to their culture, it's not surprised that in their tombs you find a lot of horse sacrifices or burials with horses. We find them to be a patriarchal society who still has many, many women warriors. They even have many similar cultural behaviors that we can still see up to centuries ago in Scandinavia and Indus Valley simultaneously without these places having any other contact with each other during this millennia of them being drifted apart. Now, how did they come to be drifted apart? That is a good question to ask. See, at around, depending on source, we can say something around like 6,000 BC, so around 8,000 years ago. Uh, the Indo-Europeans begin their migration from their homeland. There are many reasons and theories for why they've done so, none of it really confirmable. From there being encroaching ice age, overpopulation, war, famine, whatever. They start migrating and they migrate in different waves across Europe and Asia. Not all of these migrations are successful, and not all these migrations are against native people of those new places that they go to. I mean, as the world becomes more and more filled with Indo-Europeans, you have Indo-Europeans migrating to take over places from other Indo-Europeans. So it's definitely not at all a racial thing. It's just a matter of practicality and people coming in, taking over. It's just human nature. Now, this process of migration continues for almost 4,000 years. You have different groups, not all of them being successful. We have different branches of the Indo-Europeans going extinct because, again, their failure in being able to really establish in a new place on that land. And the last group of the Indo-Europeans to migrate are called the Indo-Aryans. Now, the Indo-Aryans are the category whose descendants basically are the modern day Iranians and the Indians, but the white skinned Indians. India, it's its own big package to talk about. But to just give you an understanding, one of the reasons you find that, oh, well, why is it that some Indians look so Europeans and some don't? It's because India is still to this day a mix of many, many, many people, many of whom are natives of that place and that great landscape, and many of whom are descendants of the Indo-European migrants. So that's why there are different looks and different cultures involved in that place. It's India is one of those lands that the Indo-Europeans don't really get to fully dominate and control. Now, Indo-Aryans and Iranians entrance. So Iranians migrate around and enter into Iranian plateau or around 2000 years BC. So like I said, they're the last group of the Europeans to really make a massive migration from the original homeland. Again, the Europeans keep doing migrations within themselves, like I said. In some ways, we can look at the Scandinavians and the Viking invasions of Northern Europe as one of the final waves of the Indo-European migrations, because they kind of follow the same pattern as they did. And that's why we have so much of the Scandinavian records left in British Isles, for instance. Now, as you can see this map, you may question and wonder why did they make this long cross across? Well, that's because, again, the thing that's blocking there is the Caucasus Mountain. And the Caucasus Mountain has always been, across the history, just a huge natural wall. It's very, very difficult to make, especially like a large group of people cross that mountainous area. So it's easier to make a migration across. And when you look at this map, and again, another thing that I need to clarify for you is not that they didn't have an end goal, like let's go there. They didn't have a Google map to be like, I want to go there or whatever. They're migrating, they're going slowly, generation by generation, and many of them settling along the way. So that's why a lot of these areas, especially in places in northeast of modern day Iran, places that days we will call like Tajikistan, these places used to be filled with Iranians, and they still are filled with Iranians until 1,000 years ago, even less than 1,000 years ago. We'll talk about what happened to those Iranians and how they kind of get to pushed away. But I just want you to understand that all that area is part of the Iranian people's sphere of influence and their tribes. Now, of the tribes that come further deeper and deeper into south, three main ones enter the surrounding areas of modern day Iran, and these become three major players in Iranian history. One are the Medes, who come and settle down in the western parts of the Iranian plateau near the mountains. We mentioned them last episode. It was the Medes who take over the southern uh, Urumia Lake as well. Then there are the Persians, who come and settle down toward the southern parts of the Iranian plateau. And then there are the Parthians, who stay around the northeastern part. Now, the Medians are the first of the Iranian groups to really go for that empire title. See, at around 700 BC, Dahyu Khan uh, unites the multitude of the Median tribes and establish an urban center called Hegmatane, which literally translates to the place of gathering. That correlates nowadays with the modern city of Hamadan, making Hamadan the oldest Iranian city in the Iranian plateau that's still continually inhabited. Dahyuka legislates laws and, like I said, brings centralizes power in his dynasty, which is why Iranologists consider him to be perhaps the mythical and legendary Hushang of Iranian literature. But again, don't have to get into that. Dahyuka is succeeded by his son Fervatis. Fervatis really uses the success of his father and subjugates his fellow Iranian tribes, both the Persians and the Parthians, to really create a power east of the Zagros Mountains. A power that comes into clash with the Assyrians under Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal demands Fervatis pay him tribute. Fervatis refuses. They fight battles, and Fervatis is killed in battle against Ashurbanipal. His death brings great stability into the area and the Median Empire, an instability that the Scythians, who are another group of the Iranian people from the more northeastern part of modern day Iran, who do not really travel down like the Parthians and the Medians and the Persians, and retain more nomadic lifestyle compared to their southern brothers. So they come down from the north and they start raiding and looting and pillaging the land. Fervatis' successor, however, changes all this. Fervatis' successor is called Hovak Shatare, or Uakstra if you want to go Greek, which again, I know I'm butchered that word. Either way, it's a tough word, I get it. And it means good ruler. A title and a name completely deserving of this man. Hovak Shatare is dealing with 20 years of struggle against the Scythians and the just inside instability that has followed the death of his father. But eventually he comes on top. He reunites the Medish power with the Parthians under his banner and the Persians as well. And he goes into combat with the Assyrians. Now, this is Assyrians, as like I mentioned in the last episode, on their lowest. See, the Assyrian Empire at this point was just crumbling. Egypt had become independent in around 626 BC. The Babylonians had revolted under the leadership of a Babylonian named Nabopolassar. Nabopolassar, who establishes the new Babylonian Empire, who, after 10 years of combat, eventually frees Babylon, but is unable to really attack at the heartland of Assyria. And this is where Hovak comes in. See, Hovak and Nabopolassar come into an alliance with each other against the Assyrians. So the combined forces of the Medians and the Babylonians march against the Assyrians and besiege Nineveh. The siege of Nineveh takes a while, and a lot of blood is shed, a lot of hand-to-hand combat. We still have a lot of actually remains of the siege of Nineveh. A lot of, we have a lot of skulls and skeletons, and the wounds and the close quarter combats are still remaining. But in 614, Nineveh falls to the combined forces of the Babylonians, the Medians, the Persians, and the Parthians. Havak takes over the city and sacks the city and destroyed part of the city, not the whole thing, but part of it. And again, ancient times. At this time, the Assyrian Empire was crumbling. Egypt had become independent. Babylon, under the leadership of Nabopolassar, had fought the Assyrians for almost a decade and has been able to free itself and its surrounding areas, but unable to really penetrate into the Assyrian heartland. However, with the rise of Hovakshatare in the east, Babylonians and the Iranians forge an alliance and they both attack Assyria in 1615. They besieged the city of Nineveh, and in 1640, the city of Nineveh, after bloody combat, which is still proven by the skeletal remains of the warriors of then, falls to the alliance forces. They sack the city and partially destroy it, really just pushing away the heartland of the Assyrians. After this event, Hovakshatare and Nabopolassar forge an alliance, with Hovakshatar's daughter marrying into Nabopolassar's son. Uh, Nabopolassar's son is called Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar is the man who is later credited with the creation of the Gardens of Babylon, actually. And there's a interesting legend around it. They say that Amitis, who was the daughter of Hovakshatare, was feeling homesick, and she longed for those hills and the mountainous hills and gardens of Hamadan, or Higmatane, which again, remember, it's in the Zagros Mountains, so it's a very mountainous place. So in order to recreate a sense of home, Nabuchodonosor creates the hanging gardens of Babylon. Of course, this story is false. It's cute, but it's false, because Hanging Garden of Babylon actually predates all these events, and just it's a cute story, but it's not true. But royal love story, basically. Anyways, so the Iranians, under the leadership of Medes and the Babylonian, forge an alliance, and they continue their fights against the Assyrians, because see, the Assyrian Empire was not yet down. The successor and the last king of the Assyria, whose name was Ashur Uballit II, retreats west and moves its capital to a city of Haran, which is in modern day border of Turkey and Syria. He also makes an alliance with the Egyptians, because the Egyptians themselves are wary of combined power of the Babylonians and the Iranians. And the two forces meet in combat. Again, we're dealing with very epic combat and old ancient warfare between these groups. So Egypt and Assyria on one side, Babylonia and Medians on the other side, and the Babylonians and the Medians come on top as victors, ending the Assyrian Empire once and for all. They really learned their lesson. As I mentioned, the Assyrian Empire lasted for almost 2,000 years. It went down, but as long as it really wasn't completely destroyed, it kept on reviving itself. So they wanted it completely gone. They just had it. The fall of Assyrian Empire really creates the path for the rise of the Neo-Babylonian Empire and the Median Empire. Hovakshatar also gets into combat and battles with the Lydians for a few years. The Lydians were a kingdom in modern-day Turkey, but like Anatolia. That warfare really doesn't go much anywhere, but what he does lead to is a peace and an alliance between Lydia and Media, established by the marriage of Hovakshatar's son, who's called Rishdi Vaiga, or known much more famously in the West as Astyages, who marries the princess of Lydia, Aryanis. Now, Aryanis also happens to be the sister of the future king of Lydia, Croesus. Croesus is, of course, becomes extremely famous, both culturally and historically down the line. But, having the wealth like Croesus and all. So, wrapping this up, what we have is Hovakshatar and Nabopolassar managing to put an end to 2 millennia of Assyrian Empire, creating their new empires themselves, and really changing the political landscape of the Middle East with the rise of the massive landscape of the Median Empire, the powerhouse both economically and just manpower-wise of the Babylonians, the Egyptians to the south of them, and the Lydians to the west. This is a situation that will be the new standard of the area for merely a few decades, until we have the rise of Cyrus the Great and his conquest and the establishment of the first Achaemenid and Persian Empire. That will be something that we will discuss in our next episode. I hope it has been clear so far. Thank you very much for following. See you guys then.